And we are live here at the Scientology Money Project. Welcome to everyone. Hope you're having a great evening. Jeffrey Augustine, your humble servant here. Let's see who's here. I got a comment that I should get right to the subject and not interact with my audience. And I thought about it, but I'd rather say hi to everyone. And so there you go. Hey, Fat Grammy's here. We've been talking, we've been texting. She made an allegation in a text that I am a goofball, guilty as charged. Fat Grammy. I had her phone number and I forgot, even though it's on my phone. Anyway, so I hope you're all doing great. Hey, Sarasota Jerry, one left 51,000. And we have Denise. Hello, Denise. And of course, Sean. Dialogic 1A, First Amendment. Hey, we're going to talk about that. Love the hate. I don't know. Hi, Carol from Indiana. There used to be that song in the 70s, Indiana Wants Me, but I can't go back, Lord, no. You remember that love song? This fellow's wanted for a crime in Indiana, but he can't go back. Que j'en juge, I'll meet you down by you, asshole. Oh, yeah. I love the talk of Creole. It's such a great accent. Que j'en juge, yeah, we got que j'en juge. And we're going to be talking about, hey, I was, hi, Howard Taylor from Jolly Old England in Dartmoor, the wildest part of our beautiful country. What makes it so wild? Are there demons, wild hogs, pirates? What makes it so dangerous? Now that's intriguing me. England's beautiful. I've been there. Nice to go to Cambridge. The company I worked for had a laser factory there where they built laser crystals for Nd:YAG lasers. So I'd go to England, London, Cambridge, and we would tour all over. I really like England, and of course, my lovely wife Karen was born in Calcutta, but she grew up in London. Her father was an international businessman, and Guy de la Carrière. So, yeah. Love the hat, not hate. Damn. Yes, damn, autocorrect. I am CIA, meaning the cult investigative agency. We're the other CIA. We're a lot less friendly to cults. Anyway, out on people have made a big deal about Karen having an intelligence background, me, and that instead of being sinister should be impressive. My gosh, someone was talking about the time I took dictation in a meeting where Miles Copeland was there. So I don't confirm or deny anything, by the way. Today we're going to talk about a lot of interesting stuff, but mostly about the Headley case. And this is going to be a session to interact. Hello, does anyone know the bill name of this? Thank you in advance. The Stillwater Energy, the bill name? No, let me clarify. Stillwater Energy. It's a proposed bill. And maybe the title, I could have worded it better, but Aaron Smith-Levin shared that there's Congress is going to hold a hearing on Scientology. So I have like a proposed bill that I think it's an input that they could correct. So thank you for asking that question because it clarifies what I may have done to be a bit confusing, which I'm usually not. But Miles Copeland, so you will wait with the police. Well, Miles, his sons, Andy and his other son, they work for the police. Yeah. This goes back to the 80s when I was at Hughes Aircraft on a black project and some other stuff. So not with the police, the band, but the father of the Copeland boys who are in the police, And oh, okay. So it's remote in this England. Nobody lives there for miles. Rocky outcrops called tours. It's full of mystery and old lore. The book, The Hound of the Baskervilles, was based on a house in Dartmoor. Well, that's interesting. Thank you for letting me know. So anyway, Starwater, this is a good question, and we're going to get to it. And I apologize if it was confusing. I'll fix the title. It should have said a proposal, something like that. But this is some loopholes. I've been following this forever. Now, where I want to start is with a piece of legislation that's already in place. And this goes to the case Mark and Claire Headley filed against the church. And we're going to cover a lot of ground today. And it'll be interesting because, especially for the legal types, I'm not a lawyer. What I'm saying is not legal advice, but I do work with quite a few attorneys as a private investigator. And so let's just share a screen, and we're going to go to a very important piece of legislation that Scientology hates, all cults hate. And this is okay. This is an official government website, and this is the U.S. Department of Justice. And what we're going to be discussing today is very important bill called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, otherwise known as TVPA. So the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Basically, let's just get this through the statement. This is from the Department of Justice, and I'm reading the blue portion. Quote, modern prohibitions of human trafficking in the United States have their roots in the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which barred slavery and involuntary servitude in 1865. Prior to 2000, the Department of Justice filed human trafficking cases under several federal statutes related to involuntary servitude and slavery. But the criminal laws were narrow and patchwork. In the last 2 decades, Congress has passed a number of comprehensive bills designed to bring the full power and attention of the federal government to the fight against human trafficking. Below are brief summaries of some of the most significant legislation in this area. So what the government intended to do, what Congress and the president intended to do, was to unify a patchwork of bills against involuntary servitude, slavery, human trafficking into a single act. And this goes into churches. And there's been a fight from churches, and the Headley case figures prominently. It's an important case, and I'll discuss why. So I'm assembling a lot of pieces for those people who are in on the effort, who want to help in the Congress. And I certainly want to be a part of anything. I'd love to talk to Congress about this, or any attorney who wants to get in the fight, human rights attorney, someone familiar with the TVPA, because trafficking is worse and worse. But here's the thing. In the Headley case, Judge Dale Fischer, U.S. District Judge, who I think is an ideological psychoterrorist, and do not apologize for that opinion, Judge Fischer. I think your ruling in the Headley case was terrible. I think you're a terrible jurist in that case. I've read your CV, and it seemed to me that was just a horrible ruling, and it inflicted so much misery and hell and suffering on people, including children, that I'm wondering what ideology drives you to make such a bad ruling. So I want to get that opinion out of the way, that I do have bias toward Judge Fischer. I don't think she's a good jurist at all. Not at all. And so it's not this is the problem. It's not the courts per se, but it can be individual activist jurists. And there's a big debate about the Supreme Court on that, certainly. So one judge can make a completely different ruling versus another one who has some ideological hostility or some beliefs, like the late Antonin Scalia, um, that drive them. So this is all part of the free speech debate about court reform, possibly, and some other reforms. So the thing we're looking at is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. Now, this website, and I'll put it in the show notes, you can just Google TVPA, Department of Justice, and get this webpage. But to give you a history of how much work this is needed to keep it current, they reauthorized the act in 2003. You can see it there. So they reauthorized it, and they had to, like, as they go on, they added human trafficking into RICO. To have a RICO lawsuit, you have to have predicate crimes, and so human trafficking became a predicate crime for a RICO filing, and that allowed victims to file RICO lawsuits against their traffickers. In other words, you can allege that human traffickers are part of racketeering action, and those sentences go up a great deal. And originally, too, TVPA was for civil cases, but it turned into criminal. And so this is a wealth of information. If you're going to research, please go to this website and read it. Again, a reauthorization in 2005. It provided extraterritorial jurisdiction over trafficking offenses committed overseas. So you can see the government's done a very good job. Congress has done a very good job expanding it. It established grant programs for states, Indian tribes, local governments, NGOs to strengthen assistance for trafficking. And again, in 2008, it was reauthorized and greatly expanded in 2008. This is interesting, creating new crimes that impose appropriately serious penalties on those who obstruct or attempt to obstruct the investigation or prosecution of trafficking of crimes. Now, this is important as it comes to Scientology because it has an illegal policy, and I'm going to get into that, where they actively attempt to obstruct justice into crimes and trafficking. So just put a pin in that for now. Permitting a prosecution of sex traffickers who recklessly disregard the fact that force, fraud, or coercion would be used against the victim. You know, Visa has been pulled into a lawsuit in a sex trafficking case. So this is knowledge is power. I'm not gonna read everything. But among other things, 2008 reauthorization increased the penalty for conspiring to commit trafficking related crimes. So Sea Org recruiting, you could argue that that is a conspiracy to commit a traffic related crime. And I think I have an idea. I just want to throw things out there. It's food for thought. Yeah, we're going to get there. Yeah, we're getting to 2018. I'm just giving a history of it, Fat Grammy. So 2013, again, they added more. So the government keeps making this more powerful tool. And they amended the RICO Act to include labor contract fraud. So you sign, and again, this is about suing the Church of Scientology or alleging or bringing about a civil or even criminal RICO. Ultimately, where we're heading. And I think Scientology thinks it's bulletproof, but it is far from that. In fact, Scientology is probably as weak as it's ever been. It's back on its heels. What is the Visa thing? Oh, that's unrelated to Scientology. Visa, the credit card company, has been pulled into a lawsuit. It has a lot of lawsuits against it. In fact, today, the DOJ and Department of Justice announced that they're going to try to cite Visa as a monopoly in terms of being a credit card company and price gouging and taking excessive fees. Anyway, so they amended the RICO Act to include labor contract fraud. So this is really interesting. labor contract fraud, like there was a Hindu temple raided in America. The largest Hindu temple in America, I mentioned on my last podcast, they brought in workers from India, and that was labor contract fraud. So U.S. citizens, permanent resident aliens. So you can see that subject a person knowingly destroys, conceals, removes, confiscates, or possesses certain immigration documents to a fine, imprisonment, or both. So one of the consistent complaints of Sea Org members from outside of America and even inside of America, when they go down to the ship, is Scientology seizes your passport. They take your immigration documents. They can take all of your ID so you can't escape. And Scientology, as we'll see, once like a lot of other bad cults, want to be immune from criminal prosecution. So focus on immigration documents. Are they taken? Are they stored? Because that inhibits a person's ability to escape when they're in terror for their life after having threats been made against them. And then, of course, we're coming up on 2015. So they added more on sex trafficking. They added forfeiture statutes. They amended 18 USC 1594 to direct any assets forfeited in human trafficking to be used to satisfy a victim restitution order. That's important. That could potentially be very important. They added in child porn to the definition of illicit conduct. So you can see how powerful the law has become. 2017. So where I'm headed toward is they can amend it because they reauthorize it and enhance it. You can see that the Attorney General had to issue a human trafficking victim screening protocol for use in all federal anti-trafficking, and it goes on. It's very extensive. So this is a tremendously powerful law. There's the 2017 Act to effectively assess foreign cooperation, and this is 2018. What Mona has seen. This is called the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Protection and Prevention Rehabilitation Act. So this is to prohibit labor trafficking in domestic households. This goes on where, especially in certain communities, where they'll bring over domestic staff from another country and basically enslave them. A lot of high publicity on that in major cities. Increased reporting obligations regarding the prohibition of goods produced through forced labor. That gets into questions of what is Apple doing in China's manufacturing of their iPhones. So you can see on this page the evolution of the TVPA, Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So I just wanted to establish that there's a robust body of law, and it's been evolving, and I'd like to see them reauthorize it with an amendment to extend protection to religious workers. And I'm going to explain. I'm going to explain. There was a case, and I'm going to stop sharing that. There was a case called Hosanna Tabor. And let me share screen on this. Prince. Okay. There was a pretty famous case, and it was called Hosanna Tabor Evangelical Lutheran Church and School. And basically what happened in this case. Okay, now this website, by the way, Oye, spelled O-Y-E-Z, but it's Oye. It's related to the Supreme Court. It's basically the Justice Supreme Court Center. This is a tremendous website for legal research. If you're not familiar with it, if you want to research Supreme Court cases, this is amazing. So this, and I'm not gonna, let me see if I can get my mouse to enlarge this. I can't find it. Okay, this was basically a case involving a woman who worked for Hosanna Tabor Evangelical Lutheran Church and School, and you'll see how venal Lutherans can be. Lutherans like to come across as an innocuous religion, but they're not. This case was argued in 2011, 2012, and it does have a lot of power and influence. So you can see the docket number here, decided by the Roberts Court. A great website for research, citation. Basically, Cheryl Pirich filed a lawsuit. She became sick in 2004. She went on to disability. She was diagnosed and returned to work. Okay, so basically, she had an illness. When she got better, she went back to the school. She wanted her job back because she had been ill. She should have equal employment opportunity protection. So Hosanna Tabor Evangelical Lutheran Church fired her because she'd been sick. She filed a complaint with the Equal Opportunity Commission, and basically the court ruled that's what's called the ministerial exemption. If you want to get serious about fighting Scientology legally or any cult, you have to understand how the ministerial exemption works in America, because we're not in England and we're not in other countries. In America, we have something. The worst thing to be, in my opinion, the most powerless place to be in America as a worker is a religious volunteer or a religious worker. You have no workplace protections. Ministerial exemption basically gives religions a license to exploit people and not follow any employment laws. As I've said, you don't have to be paid at minimum wage. Overtime, you get no pension. You can be subject to quite cruel treatment. You can be fired for any reason at any time. And we're going to go into a case where a law student comments on that. She was finishing up her legal degree at USC, and I'm going to comment on that. So if you work for a church in America, a religious group, you have no power whatsoever. You have no power, and churches exploit this to fire people, to do really anything at will. It's worse than self-employment. Well, okay, that's fair enough, but I mean, I'm self-employed. I have tremendous freedom. Self-employment, yeah, you know what? Being self-employed has risks. I did 30 years in corporate where I got the paycheck and the company car and all that, and I've been self-employed, so I've seen both sides of that world. And so I kind of take your point there. But if you're running a successful business, Mona, no disrespect whatsoever, but if you're running a successful business and you're your own boss, like Karen and I, then you can treat yourself how you deserve very well. You treat less benefits. Well, you can buy benefits if you're making money, but yeah, I mean, it all depends. Some people are self-employed. If you do good, you can afford those benefits. You always have Obamacare. There's ways to do a business, but yeah, self-employment can be very hard. And so I take your point there. We'll split the difference on that. But basically, the ministerial exemption, consistently courts have found that secular protections don't apply because they can't interfere. The First Amendment does not allow the government to interfere in churches. And this is where it gets really into some gray zones. And it's not always clean cut. So basically, this poor woman, Cheryl Pirich, she was disabled, wants her job back as a teacher, and the church fires her. And let me get this back up on screen. So basically, the justices said that the ministerial exemption established by courts allowed the church, the Hosanna Tabor church, it allowed them to reject equal opportunity laws and fire her. It exempted it from them. There was a ministerial exemption, so they had the right. The First Amendment are irrelevant to Hosanna Tabor's right to choose its ministers. So basically, churches can hire and fire, and they ruled that she was a minister in her role at Hosanna Tabor. So because she had to become a minister. So by analogy, once you become a Sea Org member and the Sea Org doesn't legally exist, that should be a part of every lawsuit, that the Sea Org is a fiction. That should be a part of every lawsuit against the church, I think. She had to become a minister to be a teacher, and therefore, once she became a minister, she subjected herself to ministerial exemption, so they could hire and fire her. Even though she had been sick and disabled, they could just fire her, throw her out on the street. So this case will apply as we move on, but this case is widely cited. It is it's a law having to do with churches in America are exempt from a lot of workplace discrimination laws in secular jobs. They're just exempt. They are exempt. And let's jump ahead. I'm going to wait for this, but it's pretty interesting. Let me see if I can find the paper. Yeah, this is page 11. Okay, I'm going to share this because it's very good. So I'm jumping around, and because I can, but I think you'll pick it up. Where is that case at? Is okay. So this, no, that's not what I wanted. We'll get to that later. Well, I'll just mention it while we're here. There are papers put out by the Internal Revenue Service, and this was one I read. It's dated 1994, Illegality and Public Policy Considerations. And this is a paper worth reading. It's posted on my blog. You can just type in illegality in the search engine on the Scientology Money Project. A little outdated, but it's interesting. It is very interesting to read this. Basically, churches that break the law, or what's called public policy, do not qualify for tax exemption. They can be disqualified, in fact. And this was a position paper put out up in this upper corner. You see that? That means 1994 exempt organizations. So the IRS has the IRS, and then it has IRS exempt organizations. So when you're dealing with religions, 501c3s, you're always going to be going to IRS EO, exempt organizations code. And that's a whole different, they govern exempt organizations, nonprofits, religions, and things. This is a great paper to just get some history of where the illegality doctrine came from. I think these are some good things for use in lawsuits, but it gives you a history of tax policy basis for doctrine, and it gives a history in the U.S. It's a great paper to read. I learned a lot from reading it. We're going to go back to the Bob Jones University case later in the show. So that's it. You don't have workplace protections. Now we're going to go on to another case I wanted to show you. And this is going to take a little bit of a tangent before we get into Headley. The Jehovah's Witnesses, as you know, oh yeah, Osa, it's time for you to hit the like button. You know that it improves your dynamics. It does. Patrick, thank you. Osa, this is part of a fourth dynamic campaign to like and subscribe to my channel. Well, you do anyway. I mean, you watch everything I do because you don't know what I'm going to say, or if there's any active investigations, you want to see if you can suss anything out of what I'm saying. Because we are, after all. Okay, so, oh yeah, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they sell newspapers on the street. and back in, this was a case in 1944 we're going to look at, and we're going to weave this all together. So just stay with me. The Jehovah's Witnesses have long sold newspapers on the streets since back in Judge Rutherford's days. Nation of Islam sells newspapers on the streets as well. But the Jehovah's Witnesses were famous for doing it, and they still have literature stands that they sell Watchtower publications at. This case is really interesting, and I'm just going to, because it gets into children. It gets into children, and that's what's interesting to me, is it gets into children. So Prince, okay, this is Prince versus Massachusetts. And this was decided by the Supreme Court in 1994. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses in Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, they were out selling things, and the state passed a law prohibiting boys younger than age 12 and girls younger than age 18 from selling newspapers in streets and public places. Finding was not in violation of 14th Amendment's free exercise of religion clause. So basically, a mom had custody here. Betty Simons, Sarah Prince had taken Betty Simons and her 9-year-old niece, over whom she had custody. She took her out in the streets to sell Jehovah's Witnesses literature. Now, kids can't consent, however, their guardians can. That's one of the things that when you say kids can't consent, yes, but their guardians can do things. Their parents, their guardians can do all kinds of things. And whether or not their guardians, their parents can also be liable. So this was a case where you take a 9-year-old out onto the street to sell Jehovah's Witness literature. And the state said, wait, that's a violation of child labor laws. We passed a law where, again, boys younger than age 12. Now, this tells you in child labor law, and this gets into something people like Serge Delmar need to investigate further. Child labor laws in Massachusetts in 44, boys 12 and over could work. Girls at that time, you had to be over the age of 18. You could sell newspapers in public places. Back in the days of newspapers, you had newspaper boys, they were boys, selling newspapers on the street. And they would also load up their bikes with newspaper bags and deliver newspapers. So child labor laws, in terms of consent and religion, that you have to break into its compound pieces, and experts are needed. But certainly this is an interesting case because the court said that, yes, child labor laws, the state can tell a religion that it may not violate child labor laws. They upheld the Massachusetts law prohibiting. They wanted to argue, one of the justices wanted to argue that the sidewalk, no less than the cathedral or evangelist tent, is a proper place to evangelize. However, this wasn't a case of where you evangelize. It was a case of the state has a compelling right to enforce child labor laws. And this case, I'm going to take you over to the Justia. So let's just take that off screen and stop sharing. And I'm going to get into something that's more interesting in this case, because this could be, Mona, this could be for, you're doing great work on L. Ron Hubbard Way. And I found this quote, and I wanted to give it to you. So Prince versus Massachusetts. Okay, this is in Justia, which is a great website. And let me just scroll down because I need to get to footnote 17. Okay, here's something for the people looking at L. Ron Hubbard Way with all the street closures. This was written by the Supreme Court. And so we're going to pivot for a minute, Mona. Street preaching, whether oral or by handing out literature, is not the primary use of the highway. That's what the Supreme Court said in Prince versus Massachusetts. Street preaching is not the primary use of the highway, even for adults. While for them it cannot be wholly prohibited, it can be regulated within reasonable limits in accommodation of primary and other uses. So to the extent that street preaching, religious observances are not the primary use of the highway, my argument would be to look at Scientology, its consistent attempt to use the public road for religious observances and thereby close it. That is not the primary use of a public highway. Mona, I think you could probably cite this case and getting them to stop this chronic shutting down. Someone mentioned that Scientology was offering to pay those $5,000 fees, a portion of them. And if so, that might be a conspiracy to deny the public use of the roadway. But this is an interesting case. The primary use of the highway is for the taxpayers to engage in commerce, to engage in their lives without an oppressive cult keeping the street permanently closed. So there's Mona, there's something I just found scanning through it. And I think it's interesting. That's not the primary use. So there you go. I think it's this is something you could do, and that's in this case unjustia. I'll leave it for a minute. So I thought it was interesting that not only did Prince say that child labor laws can be enforced by the state against a religion, but that also the street's not the primary, or religious use is not the primary use of the highway. So that was the point I wanted to make it. This is interesting to read if you like reading filings. I do. Not everyone does, but I just thought I'd share that. Okay, now we're going to get to the Headley case, and I've shown you a couple of things. The Headley case is interesting because let me stop that screen, and we're going to go up on slides. Okay. Now this is a ruling from I'm sorry, this is not a ruling. This is from Harvard Law Review. The Headley case has been widely reviewed. It's been very widely reviewed. A lot of scholars have looked at it, and basically, I'll post these screenshots. I'm not going to read everything, but long story short, in the Headley case, this is it at the top. Recently, top left, top paragraph. Recently, in Headley v. Scientology International, the Ninth Circuit confronted the question of whether the doctrine should exempt the defendant's church's relationship with its ministers from the constraints of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And basically what happened is Judge Fischer, she handled the matter in the lower trial, and she got promoted, as I understand it, and she ruled on the appellate level. But Judge Fischer said that religious workers do not enjoy the protections of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. I think that's a huge miscarriage of justice, gigantic miscarriage of justice. So any new law or reauthorization of the TVPA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, should explicitly say that the state has a compelling interest to protect religious workers from trafficking. So that's why I think Judge Dale Fischer, made a huge travesty of justice, a huge travesty of justice by saying that religious workers were not protected by the TVPA, that ministerial exemption excluded it. She granted the Church of Scientology summary judgment because they argued that, hey, we're exempt from it by ministerial exemption. So if there's a remedy, I think that in my mind, and I'm not a lawyer again, but in my mind, you have to give religious workers ordinary protections from human trafficking, from sex trafficking. And that's why the Headleys lost in the main. I mean, if you go through the analysis of the case, I made notes on it, but basically, I'm going to read this beginning at the upper left-hand corner, first paragraph. At summary judgment, the Headleys alleged only that the church had violated the TVPA, which imposes civil and criminal penalties for, quote, knowingly providing or obtaining the labor or services of another by means of force, threats of force, physical restraints, or threats of physical restraint, unquote, means or threats of serious harm, or means of any scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause the person to believe that the person or another person would suffer serious harm or physical restraint. The TVPA says the act defines serious harm broadly to include psychological harm. And really the essence of the Church of Scientology's staff is lower conditions, brutality, deprivation of sleep, dietary restrictions to rice and beans, no pay. So there's a lot, and also a lot of screaming and threats of being declared, losing your family, losing your friends, taking your documents, your passport, your driver's license. There's a lot of things that would come under TVPA. And in the Headley case, it was said due to ministerial exemption, you were exempt from it. So in talking to Congress, if we could get, we the people, could get Congress to reauthorize, that is, update TVPA to protect religious workers, that would be a huge move forward, because this just doesn't affect people in Scientology. I shared a case last week. I think I still have it up, or my last podcast, I shared a case. So that's it. I'm simplifying things. I realize I'm simplifying things, and they go into a lot of technical analysis, which you can read in the Supreme Court decision. Here's something it said, beginning where you can see indeed on the very top sentence. This analysis from Harvard Legal Review says, indeed, in Alcazar, which is another case, although the Ninth Circuit articulated the church and state interests at issue, the court never balanced them, finding instead that entanglement concerns required the exemption as a matter of law across statutes that interfere with the church-minister relationship, unquote. This is the next part where Harvard Legal Review really hammers it home. Such an interpretation is practically and doctrinally untenable. Taken at face value, this analysis would exempt the church-minister relationship from even criminal laws. And extended to its logical conclusion, it would prevent courts from adjudicating any claim that required evaluation of church doctrine, a position the Supreme Court has rejected. So you can see in a reductio ad absurdum what Scientology and every other bad religion out there wants, every other bad cult, they want to say you cannot interpret any of our scriptures. When Hubbard talks about make the punishments more gruesome, when he talks about, he put children in the chain locker on the Apollo. Sharon Stainforth was one of them. She was a victim. The whole, subjecting people to horrific conditions, and even covering up sex crimes has happened in Masterson, and they've covered up pedophilia. Every bad cult, and Scientology is the poster child for bad cults. It's a horrific cult. They would like to be exempt from even criminal laws. That's how far they want to take it. They want to be a law unto themselves. So they want to destroy people, destroy children, engage in fair game, brutality, and every other sort of crime, and say, oh, we have First Amendment protections. That's why protecting any modification of TVPA that would protect religious workers from the definitions in the TVPA is a good place to start. So even the Harvard Law Review noted that this is how far, bad churches want to take it. They want to be exempt from even criminal laws. I'm going to get to that in another place. I have a blog post up, and we're going to go over to it, and we're going to talk about illegality. So I'm going to put all this in my show notes, so don't worry. I'll do a post. I have a post up, and I'll add all these links. But this is sort of what I've been working on for 10 years on my blog. This was a very well-read cover-ups. I wrote this in 2020. Why the Church of Scientology will not report felonies committed by its members to the police or any government agency. Now, this was during the early preliminary, after Masterson had been indicted. This was when Tom Mesereau was still his attorney. This was still during the dark days of COVID. They're masked up. And I talk about how he could be sentenced under the one strike law. I updated it to show his conviction on 2 counts of forcible rape on May 31, 2023. But basically, I show where Hubbard violates the illegality doctrine. The illegality doctrine, let's drop down to it real quick. Bob Jones University basically lost its tax exemption because it forbade interracial dating. And so give you some pretext. The illegality doctrine, which means you cannot have tax exemption while you're breaking the laws of the United States. The illegality doctrine, I don't know why it's not cited in the cases I've read. It should be cited just as a matter of course in a lawsuit against Scientology. Show why it's breaking the law. It says the illegality doctrine, that's a United States legal doctrine that says you cannot break the law and also be tax exempt. You can't have it both ways. The illegality doctrine was applied when Bob Jones University was stripped of its religious tax exemption for engaging in racially discriminatory admissions policies and expelling students that engage in interracial dating. So Bob Jones University, Baptist, they were racially discriminatory in their admissions policies, and they expelled students that engaged in interracial dating. They lost their tax exemption. They sued. And this is from Supreme Court upheld the IRS revocation. This is an important, what you're looking at here, I'm going to enlarge it. This is really a key thing. And it says the illegality doctrine acts as a check to assure that the federal government does not support through tax exemption an organization engaged in behavior the government is charged with preventing. That's Scientology to a T. The government's charged with preventing credit card fraud, trafficking, labor trafficking, covering up crimes of all manners, sexual, financial, anything. So my argument has always been the Church of Scientology is fundamentally engaged in the illegality doctrine. They're committing crimes that the government's charged with. And that should be on its face enough to get rid of tax exemption, but it goes on. As a district court noted in an off-quoted passage, if it were not for the limits of the illegality doctrine, quote, Fagan School for Pickpockets would qualify for a charitable trust. Now, that's the reference to, we'll get to Fagan School for Pickpockets. Basically, it says the government has an interest in not subsidizing criminal activity. The tax court noted in Church of Scientology of California versus Commissioner, 1984 case, quote, were we to sustain petitioner's exemption, we would in effect be sanctioning petitioner's right to conspire to thwart the IRS at taxpayers' expense. We think such paradoxes are best left to Gilbert and Sullivan. So that's pretty damning. That is a very damning thing. And again, I don't know why for the life of me that the illegality doctrine is not pressed in every lawsuit, and I suggest it should be. And you could list a lot of cases to support, especially Masterson, to support that they did engage in illegality and cover-ups. There's plenty of court records by now. But they note here, if it were not for the limits of the illegality doctrine, Fagan's school for pickpockets would qualify for a charitable trust. I want to visit that for a minute. For those of you, because this is really Fagan's school for pickpockets. For those of you who are not unlucky enough to have been an English major like me, this gets real interesting. It's a very literary, it's a learned allusion by the court, and I wanted to share Fagan's school for pickpockets just because it resonates with Scientology to a certain extent. It's a quite remarkable learned reference. So let's go to that. Fagan's school for pickpockets. And we're going to go. This is a departure, but it's a very nice contextual piece. Not everyone. Okay, so Fagan, and some of you may know this, some may not, but Fagan is a fictional character and the secondary antagonist in Dickens' 1838 novel Oliver Twist. So basically, Fagan, pictured here, he's a receiver of stolen goods. He leads a group of children and teaches them how to become pickpockets, or also what are called cut purses, because you would cut the strap of a purse. So basically, and this is where it gets into Scientology themed, he teaches them to make their livings by pickpocketing and other criminal activities. Now, any Scientology reg who's engaged in the Chase Wave credit card fraud, the Church of Scientology is Fagan to these criminals who swindled people and engaged in credit card fraud. Isn't it interesting how the church can teach certain people how to make money for the church, get their stats up by engaging in criminal activities like the Chase Wave credit card fraud? And he said he made criminals out of scores of children. How many people, and you look at people who've grown up in the church like Julian Schwartz, his activities in covering up things. How many children has Scientology turned into criminals? And it also talks about Fagan as a confessed miser. Well, the church is miserly, except for David Miscavige. The church is a miser, and they want to spend the least amount of money possible. I'm sorry if that says it. The church wants to spend the least amount of money possible on Sea Org members, on their clothing, birthing, and food, medical care. They want to spend the least. So it says Fagan is a confessed miser who, despite the wealth that he has acquired, does very little to improve the squalid lives of the children he guards or his own. That's like Sea Org, kids that grew up in the Sea Org. That's like Sea Org members. How can we keep all the money for ourselves and get the most amount of production out of you through force, fear, psychological trauma, lower conditions, brutality? How can we get the most out of you and give you the least amount while beating you? And so I think Fagan is a good analogy of a very corrupt individual who enslaves others, particularly children, and teaches them his criminal ways. So I thought that reference was very astute, and I just wanted to share it as someone who's read literature widely. Now let's get some comments. I want to get Fat Grammys. There is a more recent case that upholds child labor in ministries. We'll refine it for you. Thanks. Send it over, Fat Grammy. We're still going to go one more case. Federal law specifically says criminal activity cannot be cloaked by religion. Yes, but why wasn't that enforced in Masterson? Why wasn't there a separate case about Masterson? I always wonder why, because of the church's involvement. their clear involvement and it's there. You wonder why the Masterson case and the cover up the church played should be brought to the attention of the IRS. We need somebody willing to do that, even if it's the Jane Does. If they have evidence of the cover-ups and the money, they should bring it to the attention of the IRS to show it as a violation of public policies. Because I think Masterson is one of the most horrific cases that's happened, but it does show intent to cover up and to violate public policy, to threaten with punishment those who want to speak out against their victimization, horrific victimization. So, yeah, so that is an interesting thing. And anyway, in Headley, they didn't get, Mark and Claire did not, the Judge Fischer denied them the protections of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And that's the main thing I want to say. Any new law should, again, allow religious workers specifically to be protected by the TVPA, because that's something the government has an interest in, making sure that religious workers are not trafficked. That's a legitimate interest of the state, to give protections to those who would otherwise be exempt through the legal machinations of a bad cult like Scientology. And that's what this is really about. This is like a focus on it. And I wanted to, so that's the bottom line, to get back to your question. That's what I'm suggesting in this. That's one possible pathway through. And if we really do have access to members of Congress, you don't even need to wait for congressional hearings. You could, I'm going to write this up. And once I write it up, it'll be a form letter. Then I'll post on my blog. I'm going to work with a lawyer to make it lawyerly. And I'll post it, and a lot of us can send it in, because we can send it in to our respective congresspersons and senators in the White House. And I'm not going to go political here, but I have some definite beliefs about that. I want to show you another great research site. Let's bid adieu to Fagan. For researchers who want to go there, this is another site. So I showed you Oye. I'm just showing you a lot of things I look at, and you share with me if you have something you like. Now, there's an organization, and it is called FIRE, thefire.org. Now, this is First Amendment court cases. This is a great website if you want to research First Amendment. 920 cases posted. And these are briefs, and they cover all kinds of First Amendment issues. But this is such a great website. There's so many resources out there. I know people like me in the open source intelligence community, we go there to research. A lot of people do. So look at that. That's just another thing I want to show you. Let's go back all the way to the end. So they have cases back to 1899, 1890, but there's a wealth of stuff you can find in here. So I keep up on this. Here, this case, Fire's brief argues that true threats which are outside the First Amendment's protection should only be found where there is evidence of the speaker's specific intent to threaten. This case interested me because Scientologist Leigh Dundas, who's an attorney out in Orange County here now in Southern California, she said that as far as she was concerned, she was out there at January 6th. She said as far as she was concerned, traitors should be taken out back and hanged or shot, which is horrible. I don't know why she was saying that, but anyway, this is a wealth of information and summaries, things like that for your research. So that's it. Be right back, phone. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. I have one more thing I want to show you, and then we'll conclude. So again, this is, I don't have a huge audience, but I have a really intense, great audience. And then people do drop in. I always appreciate it. I'm going to show you one more piece that's worth reading that I'm going to definitely post. It's not that one. It is share screen. Let me see if that's it. No, that's the law review. Hold on a minute. Oh yeah, this is a great one. I'm sorry, I try to have everything organized for you, but I'm not always. Okay, now this is a great paper. Again, it's a PDF. Notes. Closing a loophole, Headley versus Scientology International, as an argument for placing limits on the ministerial exemption from clergy disputes. I think this is a tremendous paper. Molly Girat, class of 2012, University of Southern California Good School of Law. She wrote this, and it's a 65-page paper discussing the Headley case and why, and I agree with this paper, why there should be limits on ministerial exemption from clergy disputes. Because as it now stands, and she makes a lot of great arguments in her paper. This is very well laid out. And I'm going to post this on my blog in its entirety, all by itself. And an analysis of the Headley case, it was so data rich and it was so poorly ruled on by the judge. But this is extensively footnoted. And you can tell, even Mark Headley's book is quoted in the footnotes. This is one of the best papers out there in terms of easy to read, an understanding of Scientology. And the author, she quotes a lot of what you see. Scientology's lawsuits are cookie cutter. And I've noticed that they're asserting their religious beliefs of what Scientology is and does. And I'm going to analyze some of their legal filings because they are becoming cookie cutter. And if you anticipate them, you know what they're going to say. This is a little dated. It mentions defectors, including Marty Rathbun. But this is another, I think, Mona and other researchers out there. I think this is an important paper, to read. Like I said, a little bit data, but it talks about forced abortions and all kinds of things. But the details are in the footnotes fantastically. They were told that the baby was just tissue and things like that. It's down to that level of very well researched. So I may reach out to the author and do a show on that. But that's the main thing. The ministerial exemption allows Church of Scientology and other cults to get away with murder. And as I covered last week, there was this case that you should read. I'm going to remind you, if you weren't listening last week, this is a case that I do so hope you look at. The United Nation of Islam, not associated with Nation of Islam. There's what's called the United Nation of Islam, and 6 members in this cult fell apart, but they were convicted of forced labor, including multiple minors. Now, this is a case for Serge to look at, and his colleagues who are researching this, for Mona, everyone looking at it. Look at this case. I did a podcast. I'm going to post, I believe, I did post on my blog. My last blog post is, let me go to my blog. This seems to have given TVPA protections to this is United Nation of Islam. I did post the actual press release from the Department of Justice. And basically, I went through the history of the cult and how it was started, what came of it. And so this is, let's just take a look at it real quick. Because I think this is the first case I've seen where TVA is a very meaningful part of an actual legal victory. It's pretty amazing. So this is the first conviction under TVA of a religion. And someone speculated to me that because they didn't have any money, they couldn't fight like Scientology. But I think even if they had a lot of money, they would still be, they would have still been, they would have still been convicted. So, okay, this is up on my blog post, and I did a podcast on it. But this is the actual Department of Justice. 2 people pleaded guilty. So this is, and it describes how even threats of burning in hell in the afterlife are a violation because they're a threat. That if you don't do your work, you will burn in hell in the afterlife. That's a violation of the trafficking victims because there's a threat that if you don't work, if you don't labor, you will go to hell. That's duress. And you know what? The government, it doesn't require the government to rule or interfere in the doctrine. It's just the fact that a threat was made. So the government didn't have to inquire into the doctrine of hell at all. It just had to establish that a threat was made. And that's a pretty amazing finding. And then this thing I've asked everyone to read, United States versus Majid. He was one of the members of United Nation of Islam. And in his memorandum in order that happened before the trial, this is amazing legal architecture. And this was an example of a great judge allowing some things in, allowing out. But the government here staked out such a great case. The prosecutors did such a great job of talking about a scheme, plan, or pattern, which I think the Sea Org is. Again, even though it doesn't exist, you should get it out there that it doesn't exist to establish it in the staff members. But it talks about threats, and there was, group confessions. This thing almost reads exactly like Scientology. Emotional and psychological abuse, isolation, and kidnapping. So please, if you're, please do read these. Also ask if you like and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to do a lot of legal work, and that's what I'm good at. I'm not the top YouTuber in the world. That's just not my talent, but I'm good at researching. Fat Grammy, has done so many incredible things. Oh, thank you. I like your logo. Okay, what did she say? My mom directed Oliver at TU. I played Bet. Well, if you've ever seen it on stage, it's really something to see. And you can still read. People are still doing Oliver Twist. They're still doing performance of it. So, hi, mainly Linda. Anyway, that's it. It's a technical discussion, but bottom line, I'll repeat again for the umpteenth time. We should ask our Congress to update the Trafficking Victims Protection Act to extend to religious workers. That would be a powerful tool in combating all cults, but especially Scientology, which is the most egregious abuser. They want ministerial exemption to commit crimes. If they could get it, they would get it. And I think that's the pith of the matter, is when Judge Fischer said Mark and Claire can't have those protections. That to me betrayed her ideological bias. I don't know what drives her in particular. But again, when you look at justices, you could see their extremist views in some cases. So there's something that drove the judge. So anyway, thank you all for watching. And we're going to go out with one of my favorite people, my favorite actors, Bob Odenkirk. And what a great actor. What a great show, Better Call Saul. Love the acting. And hope you all have a great evening. I'll tune in next time. Hope you enjoyed the show. And I'll see you next time. So there we go.